The Outsiders, 8 Unconventional CEOs and Their Radically Rational Blueprint for Success by William N. Thorndike Jr. Hello and welcome. I'm really glad you're here with me today. Quick question. When I say CEO, what pops into your head? I'm guessing it's someone charismatic plastered across Fortune magazine. You know the type. Big personality. Always jetting somewhere important. Giving TED Talks. Dropping massive announcements that make headlines. For the longest time, the poster child for this was Jack Welch, the absolute legend who ran General Electric. Between 1981 and 2001, Welch basically owned the business world. The guy was everywhere. Famous for being ruthlessly effective and delivering insane results. Here's a fun fact. If you'd thrown a single dollar at GE when he took the reins, you'd have walked away with $48 when he retired. By anyone's measure, the man was a rock star. But here's where it gets interesting. What if I told you that during that exact same period there was this other group of leaders operating in the shadows? They weren't giving keynote speeches. They weren't gracing magazine covers. Most of them worked out of unremarkable offices, nowhere near Wall Street's bright lights. And yet, get this, they didn't just beat Jack Welch. They absolutely demolished his performance. While a dollar with Welch turned into 48, a dollar with these mystery CEOs would have averaged over $1,500. Yes, you heard that right. They outperformed the market by more than 20 times. These hidden champions are the stars of an absolutely brilliant book by William N. Thorndike Jr. called The Outsiders. This isn't your typical dry business book. It's basically a revelation, pulling back the curtain on a completely different playbook for success. A radically rational approach that throws out almost everything we've been taught about leadership. Over the next hour, I'm going to walk you through their secrets. And honestly, this goes way beyond business. This is about a different way of thinking, about the quiet power of being rational, the guts it takes to think independently, and the jaw-dropping results that come from having the discipline to zig when literally everyone else is zagging. By the time we're done, you'll understand what might be the single most important job of any leader, something almost never taught in business schools, and you'll have a framework that can guide your decisions, whether you're running a Fortune 500 company, managing a small project, or just trying to navigate your own life better. So get comfortable. Let's dive into the world of the outsiders. All right, where do we start? With a deceptively simple but profound question. What actually measures a CEO's success? Most people, and definitely most business journalists, would point to growth. Did the company get bigger? More revenue? More employees? But Thorndike says this is like judging a baseball pitcher by their height instead of their wins. Completely missing the point. The real test, he argues, is the long-term increase in per-share value. Not about getting bigger, it's about getting more valuable for every single owner. And when you measure success that way, all those celebrity CEOs we think we know, often nowhere near the top of the list. The true masters are the outsiders. And the first, possibly the greatest of them all, was a guy named Henry Singleton. Chances are you've never heard of him, but Warren Buffett once said Singleton had the best operating and capital deployment record in American business. Coming from Buffett, that's basically the Nobel Prize of business compliments. Singleton was far from typical. We're talking about a world-class mathematician who programmed MIT's first computer and could play chess blindfolded. A scientist who developed critical technology for Allied ships in World War II. The guy was, quite simply, a genius. In the 1960s, he founded a company called Teledyne. Back then, conglomerates, these massive companies owning tons of unrelated businesses, were super trendy. But Singleton ran his differently. He was an iconoclast, someone who loved smashing conventional wisdom. He completely ignored Wall Street and the press, which earned him the nickname the Sphinx. While other companies were obsessed with looking good for Wall Street analysts, paying dividends to keep investors happy, and constantly expanding, Singleton did the opposite. He had a fundamentally different philosophy that would become the blueprint for every other outsider in this book. Here's what he understood. A CEO has exactly two jobs. First, run the day-to-day business efficiently. Second, and this is the kicker, decide what to do with the money that business generates. This second job is called capital allocation, and it's, hands down, the most important skill of a great CEO. Think of it this way. Once a business makes a profit, what should you do with that cash? You've got 5 choices. 1. Reinvest in your existing operations. 2. Acquire other businesses. 3. Pay dividends to shareholders. 4. Pay down debt. 5. Buy back your own stock. That's your toolkit. The long-term success of any company depends not just on how well it runs day to day, but on how wisely its leader uses these 5 tools. In Teledyne's early days, when his stock price was sky-high, Singleton used it like currency to buy over 130 other companies. He was brilliant at acquisitions, always buying profitable, well-run businesses at disciplined prices. But then something shifted in 1969. The market cooled off and his stock price dropped. Suddenly, using his stock to buy companies wasn't a smart move anymore. So what did he do? He stopped. Just like that. Fired his entire acquisition team and never bought another major company again. Instead, he looked at his toolkit and spotted a new, much better opportunity. He realized the best investment in the entire world was sitting right in front of him, his own company's stock, which he believed was absurdly undervalued. So he started buying it back. And we're not talking small-time dabbling here. Between 1972 and 1984, Henry Singleton executed 8 massive tender offers and bought back a staggering 90% of Teledyne's outstanding shares. Nobody had ever done anything like this before. Wall Street was completely baffled. They thought it signaled weakness, like he'd run out of ideas. But Singleton understood the math perfectly. Buying back stock at a low price is like compressing a spring. It makes every remaining share more valuable, because each one now represents a bigger slice of the company's earnings. He was deliberately shrinking the denominator to make the per-share value explode. And boy, did it work. $1 invested with Henry Singleton in 1963 would have turned into $180 by his retirement in 1990. During that same stretch, $1 in the broader market would have become only $15. He crushed the market by over 12 times. And he didn't do it by inventing some world-changing product. He did it through relentless, rational focus on capital allocation. Singleton's story gives us the core principles of what Thorndike calls the outsider mindset, a set of beliefs all 8 of these CEOs shared, even though they developed them completely independently. Let's call them the outsider commandments. First commandment: capital allocation is a CEO's most important job. While other CEOs spent their energy on operations, the outsiders obsessed over deploying cash for the best possible return. Second, what matters long-term is the increase in per-share value, not overall size. They'd rather own a smaller, more valuable company than a bloated, less profitable one. This is why they were totally comfortable buying back stock and, as we'll see, selling off entire divisions. Third, cash flow, not reported earnings, determines long-term value. Wall Street obsesses over reported earnings, but that number's easily manipulated. The outsiders knew cash is king. It's the fuel for everything: growth, acquisitions, buybacks. Fourth commandment: the power of decentralization. The outsiders ran their companies with shockingly tiny headquarters. Singleton had fewer than 50 people at Teledyne's head office, out of 40,000 employees total. This wasn't just penny pinching. It was philosophy. They believed the best decisions came from people on the ground. By giving their general managers extreme autonomy, they unleashed entrepreneurial energy and kept bureaucracy and infighting, what one CEO called rancor, basically non-existent. The final commandment, which ties everything together: independent thinking, is absolutely essential to long-term success. They had what Thorndike calls feisty independence. They tuned out the noise from Wall Street, the press, and so-called experts. They did their own analysis, trusted their own math, and had the courage to act on it, even when it made them look completely foolish to everyone watching. This shared worldview, this radical rationality, connects them all. Let's look at another outsider, Tom Murphy of Capital Cities Broadcasting. Warren Buffett called Murphy and his partner Dan Burke probably the greatest two-person combination in management that the world has ever seen. When Murphy became CEO in 1966, his company was basically a small collection of TV and radio stations. A tiny rowboat next to the industry's massive ocean liner, CBS, run by the legendary Bill Paley. But Murphy had a beautifully simple goal. As he put it, the goal is not to have the longest train, but to arrive at the station first using the least fuel. While CBS was diversifying into random businesses like buying the New York Yankees and building a ridiculously lavish headquarters in Manhattan, Murphy focused with laser-like intensity on what he actually knew: media. He followed a deceptively simple formula: buy media properties, use leverage smartly, improve their operations until they're generating tons of cash, pay down the debt, then rinse and repeat. He created what one investor called a, quote, perpetual motion machine for returns. Like Singleton, Murphy ran an incredibly lean, decentralized operation. He believed in hiring the absolute best people, and then, in his words, leaving them alone. His partner Dan Burke was the operational genius, famous for rigorous budgeting. General managers would meet with him once a year for this intense, line-by-line review. If they hit their numbers, they might not hear from headquarters again for months. This combination of tight financial control and operational freedom was pure outsider DNA. Murphy was also a master capital allocator. He'd wait patiently, sometimes years, for the right deals, never participating in auctions where prices got crazy. But, when he spotted an opportunity he truly understood, he'd move with incredible boldness. In 1986, he made a move that stunned everyone in media. His little rowboat, Capital Cities, acquired the giant ABC network, a company many times its size. The Wall Street Journal's headlines said it all: "Minnow swallows whale." Everyone was skeptical. But Murphy and Burke knew they could dramatically improve ABC's profitability by installing their lean, decentralized culture. They immediately cut unnecessary perks like the executive elevator and private dining room. They slashed the staff overseeing TV stations from 60 people down to 8. Within 2 years, the margins at ABC's stations had soared to match Capital Cities' industry-leading levels. Over his 29-year run, Tom Murphy delivered nearly 20% annual returns to shareholders. That little rowboat didn't just win the race, it left the Queen Elizabeth II in its wake. $1 invested with Murphy became $204. This pattern of patient waiting followed by bold, decisive action is another key outsider trait. They had what you might call a quote-unquote crocodile-like temperament. They could sit perfectly still on the riverbank for years, waiting for the exact right opportunity. But when it swam by, they'd strike with blinding speed. Take Dick Smith of General Cinema. He inherited a chain of drive-in movie theaters from his father. For an entire decade, from the mid-1970s to mid-1980s, he basically sat on the sidelines while prices for media and consumer companies went through the roof. His peers were on this massive acquisition binge, but Smith? He did nothing. People criticized him for being too timid. But he was just waiting. Then, in 1985, a deal landed on his desk. A retail conglomerate called Carter Hawley Hale was facing a hostile takeover and desperately needed a friendly investor, a white knight, and they needed one fast. The timeline was almost impossible. They needed an answer in less than a week. Smith and his tiny team flew to Los Angeles on a Friday, worked straight through the weekend in intense negotiations, and by Monday had a deal. They could move that quickly because they knew exactly what they were looking for: a complex situation that scared off other buyers, where they could negotiate excellent terms. The deal was a home run, generating an incredible 51% long-term return. This ability to act decisively comes from doing the math. The outsiders didn't rely on gut feelings or follow the crowd. They had simple, powerful rules for evaluating any investment. For Murphy, it was a double-digit after-tax return over 10 years without leverage. For Smith, it was 11% cash return. If a deal didn't meet their conservative calculations, they walked away, no matter how strategic it seemed. This discipline separated them from their peers, who often got swept up in deal fever, a phenomenon Buffett calls the institutional imperative, that mindless tendency for executives to imitate each other, no matter how foolish it is. The outsiders were completely immune to this pressure. Maybe no one exemplifies this radical rationality better than Bill Anders at General Dynamics. Anders wasn't your typical CEO. The guy was a former astronaut who'd orbited the moon on Apollo 8. After a career like that, he said mundane business problems didn't faze him. He took over General Dynamics in 1991, right after the Berlin Wall fell. The Cold War was over, and the defense industry was in total chaos. General Dynamics was seen as the worst-positioned company in a declining industry. Classic turnaround situation. Anders brought a completely fresh perspective. He looked at an industry with massive excess capacity and came to a simple, brutal conclusion. Companies needed to either consolidate or be consolidated. He decided General Dynamics should only stay in businesses where it was number 1 or 2. Any division that didn't meet that standard, sell it. This was revolutionary. CEOs are basically trained to grow their empires, not shrink them. But Anders was completely unsentimental. Over the next 2 years, he sold off most of the company's businesses, including its missile division, electronics division, and even its iconic F-16 fighter jet business. A business he, as a former fighter pilot, personally loved. When the CEO of Lockheed offered an absurdly high price for the F-16 division, Anders didn't hesitate, sold it on the spot. He chose the rational business decision that maximized per-share value, even though it shrank his company to less than half its former size. This generated a tsunami of cash, $5 billion. And what did he do with it? He didn't plow it into new, risky projects. He gave it back to shareholders through massive special dividends and a huge stock buyback that retired 30% of the company's shares. It was unprecedented, shrinking a company to greatness. Under Anders and his 2 hand-picked successors, $1 invested in General Dynamics became $30 over 17 years, wildly outperforming both the market and defense industry peers. These stories show us the outsiders weren't just contrarian for kicks. This was intelligent iconoclasm, informed by careful analysis. They were like Billy Beane in Moneyball, the baseball manager who ignored traditional stats like batting average and focused on new metrics like on-base percentage that actually correlated with winning. The outsiders did the same for business. They ignored Wall Street's favorite metric, reported earnings per share, and focused instead on free cash flow. John Malone, the brilliant and somewhat feared CEO of cable giant TCI, pioneered this approach. He realized that in the capital-intensive cable business, trying to maximize reported earnings was completely pointless. Why? Because higher earnings meant higher taxes. Malone absolutely hated taxes. He saw them as leakage and applied his engineering mindset to minimizing them. His strategy was to use debt to build and acquire cable systems, then use the depreciation from those assets and the interest on debt to shelter cash flow from taxes. As a result, TCI rarely reported a profit and therefore rarely paid taxes. Wall Street was totally confused, but Malone didn't care. He was running the company for cash, not appearances. To explain his strategy to lenders and the few investors who got it, he invented completely new terminology, terms we take for granted today, like EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, were first introduced to the business world by John Malone. It was a way to show the pure cash-generating power of the business. This focus on cash flow fueled his relentless pursuit of scale. Malone understood that the biggest cable operator would have the most leverage with programmers like HBO and ESPN, letting them negotiate the lowest costs. This created a virtuous cycle. More subscribers meant lower programming costs, which meant higher cash flow, which let him use more debt to buy more subscribers, and on and on. Between 1973 and 1989, TCI made an average of one acquisition every 2 weeks. By the time he sold the company to AT&T in 1998, a dollar invested with Malone had become worth over $900. He'd outperformed his public peers by 5 times. The outsiders also shared distinct personal characteristics. They were generally frugal, humble, and analytical, devoted to their families, often leaving the office early for school events. They didn't give Chamber of Commerce speeches or attend glitzy conferences in Davos. They were insiders in their own small worlds, but complete outsiders to the broader culture of celebrity CEOs. This was certainly true of Katharine Graham, publisher of The Washington Post. Her story is perhaps the most remarkable of all. She was thrust into the CEO role in 1963 after her husband's tragic death. At 46, she was a mother of 4 with virtually no business experience. In her own words, she was terrified. But over the next 2 decades, she became the best newspaper executive in the country. How? She had incredible courage, standing up to the Nixon administration during the Pentagon Papers and Watergate crises. She had the toughness to break a violent pressman's strike that threatened to shut the paper down. And most importantly, she had the humility to know what she didn't know. In 1974, a young, unknown investor from Omaha started buying up a large chunk of her company's stock. Her board was suspicious and advised keeping him at arm's length. But Graham met with him, immediately recognized his brilliance, and invited him to join her board. That investor, of course, was Warren Buffett. He became her mentor in business and capital allocation. With his guidance, she started seeing the Post not just as a newspaper, but as an extraordinary business with a powerful franchise. And she started thinking like an owner. She kept dividends low, reinvesting cash flow. She was incredibly patient with acquisitions, standing on the sidelines during the frenzied deal-making of the 1980s. And following Buffett's advice, she launched a massive stock buyback program, repurchasing nearly 40% of the company's shares at rock-bottom prices. None of her newspaper peers did this. When she stepped down, a dollar invested in the Post at its IPO had become worth $89. The same dollar in the S&P 500 was worth just $5. She did it by combining journalistic courage with the quiet, rational principles of an outsider. Finally, we come to the living embodiment of all these principles, Warren Buffett of Berkshire Hathaway. In many ways, Buffett is the ultimate outsider. He started with a failing textile mill in New England, and, without issuing much stock or taking on much debt, turned it into one of the largest and most successful companies on earth. How? By practicing everything we've just discussed but turned up to 11. Berkshire Hathaway is the most decentralized company imaginable. With over 270,000 employees worldwide, corporate headquarters in Omaha has only about 24 people. He hires great managers and leaves them completely alone. His philosophy, hire well, manage little. But like all the outsiders, capital allocation is highly centralized. All excess cash from Berkshire's many businesses flows to Omaha, where Buffett and his partner Charlie Munger make all major investment decisions. His primary source of capital has been float from his insurance businesses, premiums collected up front that can be invested before claims are paid out. He's called this the fuel for Berkshire's growth. It's low-cost, long-term funding that he's invested with legendary skill. His approach mirrors the outsider playbook perfectly. He's intensely patient, often going years without making a major investment. He calls it inactivity, bordering on sloth. But when he sees a no-brainer, an excellent business at a fair price, he acts with enormous conviction, sometimes investing billions in a single company. He's created a unique culture at Berkshire that attracts like-minded, long-term shareholders. He communicates through long, thoughtful annual letters, not sound bites. He's never split Berkshire's A-class stock, which now trades for hundreds of thousands of dollars per share, because he wants to attract owners, not speculators. Buffett's success is the ultimate validation of the outsider's path. He proved you don't need a charismatic, larger-than-life personality to build an empire. What you need is a rational temperament, unyielding discipline, and a long-term perspective. You need to think for yourself. These 8 CEOs, Singleton, Murphy, Smith, Anders, Stieritz, Malone, Graham, and Buffett, were all different industries, different eras, but they were all citizens of the same tiny intellectual village, a place Thorndike calls Singletonville. In that village, the rules were different. Logic ruled, patience was a virtue, and the only scorecard that mattered was long-term value creation for owners. They were foxes in a world of hedgehogs, able to draw on ideas from different fields to see opportunities nobody else could, and their collective record stands as quiet but powerful proof of their radically rational approach. So what do we actually take away from all this? When you step back and look at these 8 incredible leaders, you realize this book isn't really about business strategy at all. It's about a mindset, a way of seeing the world. The most powerful lesson for me is this idea that the most effective path is often the least crowded one. The institutional imperative, that pressure to follow the herd, is just as powerful in our own lives as it is in corporate boardrooms. We see what our peers are doing, what society expects, and we feel this deep instinctual pull to conform. It takes real courage and a strong internal compass to resist that pull, to sit still when everyone's running, or to make a bold move when everyone else is frozen. The outsiders had that compass. It was built on radical rationality. They always did the math. They weren't swayed by emotion, ego, or the latest management fad. They focused on cold, hard numbers, and let that guide their decisions. This doesn't mean they were robots. It means they had the clarity to see through noise and focus on what truly mattered. And this brings me to what I think is the most actionable idea for anyone, at any stage of life, thinking like an owner, not a manager. A manager focuses on the day-to-day, on meeting quarterly targets, on looking good for the boss. An owner thinks long-term. An owner is careful with resources because they're their own. An owner is willing to look unconventional today to be successful tomorrow. You can apply this to anything. When you're deciding on a career path, are you thinking like a manager, just chasing the next promotion? Or are you thinking like an owner of your own life, investing in skills and experiences that will compound over decades? When you manage personal finances, are you spending to keep up appearances? Or are you allocating your own capital, your savings, to projects offering the best long-term return, whether that's paying down debt, investing, or starting a small business? The outsiders give us a checklist for making these big decisions. First, always do the math. Start with clear-eyed analysis of potential return on any investment of your time, money, or energy. Second, recognize the denominator matters. It's not just about growing, it's about being efficient and focused. Sometimes the smartest move is to shrink, to cut out activities, commitments, or even relationships not delivering good returns. Third, cultivate feisty independence. Have the confidence to trust your own analysis and chart your own course, even if it looks completely different from everyone else's. In a world getting louder and faster every day, the lessons of these quiet, patient, rational leaders feel more relevant than ever. They remind us that true success is rarely found in the spotlight. It's found in the quiet, consistent application of sound principles over very long periods. That was a summary of The Outsiders by William N. Thorndike Jr. We've explored the core ideas today, but I have to be honest, a summary can only ever be a map. The real treasure comes when you make the journey yourself. The magic of this book is in the detailed stories, the subtle insights, and the way it slowly rewires your brain to see the world differently. This summary is designed to help you decide if this book deserves your time. If anything we've discussed today has sparked your curiosity or challenged your perspective, I really encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning business principles. It's an experience that can genuinely change how you approach every major decision in your life. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Thank you for spending this time with me. Let's keep growing together.